Mainland, we help beginners begin.
So the starting point for the music discussion with the elements of music, we start with the elements of music, and that is the building blocks of the things that make music happen. The two elements that are primarily responsible, and at least the starting point for us, are at steady beat and rhythm. Now, the rhyme that I always tell my students with steady beat is that steady beat doesn't change and it stays the same. So when you're talking about a steady beat, you're talking about a beat pattern that doesn't change. So it's the same note over and over again, right? So that could be represented by a set of slashes or quarter notes, right? It's the same thing over and over again, repeatedly. When we talk about a rhythm is a pattern of long and short notes. That's what I usually tell everybody. And the key word there is pattern. Pattern of long and short notes. That whole phrase right there is actually really important, right? And long and short notes implies that it's different stuff, but it's a pattern of that different stuff. So it might be a check and then a circle, and then a check and then a circle, and then a check and then a circle, right? That's a pattern, long and short, right? Or that could be right? Either of those would be representative of that sentence, yeah? Okay, so let's start off with that as our kind of ideology for where we want to start with learning music is steady beat, and then it doesn't change and it stays the same. And then rhythm is a pattern of long and short notes. That is always going to be the case. Now, if you zoom in, there are some really, really complex patterns that essentially will give you a steady beat. If you zoom out, there are some complex rhythms that are comprised of different steady beats happening. So those two can be used interchangeably. Sometimes they are, but there is an actual difference between the two. Now, if we're going to talk about that, let's move on to basically what we're going to see when we start off. And when we start with notation, we're going to start with the big beats and go to the little ones. And what I mean by that is there are a couple of different types of notes that you're going to see, and they will be the ones that will start us off. So I'm going to give you two different ways to see that. The first one is, well, three. The first one, I'm going to draw a note tree for you, and it's going to start with the biggest note. Now, I'm going to put off to the side that each line of this tree will equal 4 beats. So I'm going to just write that here. Each line is equal to 4 beats. All right, we got that across the top. Okay, so the first one we're going to start out with is a whole note. And a whole note by itself is worth 4 beats. Well, that whole note breaks into 2 half notes, and each of those half notes is worth 2. But those 2 half notes together still equal 4 beats. Those break down into 4 quarter notes, and each quarter note is worth 1 beat. And so we still have 4 beats, right? Those quarter notes break down into eighth notes. And while they could be written like this, most of the time we will see them beamed together like that. And 8 of those equal 4 beats. Now the last one I'm going to get to, and this is just because we keep on saying this is where we begin, is to break these down to 16th notes. And so to 16th notes, essentially This is 1/16 note. That is 2/16 notes. Or the two could be beamed together like this with two brackets or two bars. Most of the time, though, we see them like this. And they'll have two lines. That one's a little messy. Let me do that one a little bit tighter. I mean, these are markers after all. It can be a little, not as clean. Anyway, so I'm going to draw them a little bit bigger just so they can be more distinct. And hopefully that will help. Right? Okay. And again, these are all equal to 4 beats. So that's really as far as we're going to go in terms of how these are put together. Now, let me draw it for you in a different way. Okay? So if I start out with that same whole note, and it's going to have 4 beats, right? So it is a circle, and I'm just going to do this circle, and this circle equals 4 beats, right? Okay, 4 beats. Now, I can take that circle or that whole note and I divide it in half. I now have 2 halves, each worth 2 beats, right? So a whole note would be the whole thing. Half note would be half of this, right? Then I can divide it into 4 pieces, and those would be our quarter notes, or 4 different pieces, right? So from there, we can divide those. And so if we divide each quarter into halves or eighths, we will then have sections of eighth notes. I can then divide those again in half, and I will then have 16th notes. Or 16ths. So the thing is, when you get to those smaller notes within a piece of music, they're essentially just smaller divisions of those notes. And listen, I'm human, so it ain't perfect, but this is essentially the distinction. So we still actually have our first, right? Our first one was right here, and that was the half that divided it into half. I'm going to put some checks there so you can see which one is the half. But that still divided it in half, right? We then have we divide it into quarters, right? And so it still all equals the same thing. But let's say I was to do the same thing and then only use one piece of the circle for each part, right? So again, the whole circle is our whole note. Boom, right? And then if I divide it in half, right? So this equals 4 beats. This part is 2. That part is 2. Now if I divide these, it's now into 4 equal pieces. Okay? So now, from this point, this represents a quarter note, each of these, right? If I divide this in half like this, this is now a set of eighth notes. If I divide this one into half and then into half again, this one is now a set of 16th notes. Right? So again, the whole thing is all 4 beats. To divide it in half is 2. To cut it and divide it again, I have 4 quarters. And of those 4 quarters, I can divide one of the quarters in half, and it becomes a set of eighth notes. If I divide that another quarter into 4 pieces that are equal, it becomes 16th notes. But that's essentially the breakdown for these beats. Now, last thing I'm going to show you is how we're going to set up our cards when we write rhythms, and I'm just going to pull this one off to the side here. And it's a different card I have, and it's going to look like this. And so what we have here is our time signature at 4/4, and then we have our 4 beats going down the side or going down the bottom, right? And so this gives us a framework so that we can write our rhythms in and to make sure that we have covered every beat and filled it all up. So in this arrangement, if I write a whole note, that takes up all 4 beats. I can't fit anything else into this measure or into these 4 beats. If I wanted to write half notes in, right, I'd have to take away the whole note. And then a half note, I could fit 2 of them. So I could put one here, but that would take up beats 1 and 2. I could only put another one here, and that would take up beats 3 and 4. And now there's no more space left in this measure, right? Okay, a little bit of background. So these 4 beats equal our measure. This time signature is 4/4. This top 4 tells us the number of beats in each measure. And the bottom 4 is telling us that we're going to count with the quarter note. Real quick, if I was going to use multiple different time signatures, right, the easiest way to figure that out is literally just to change whatever the number is into a fraction and put 1 on top and then put whatever that bottom number is on the bottom. And that will give you an idea as to what you're using to count with, right? So in 4/2, 2 is on the bottom. So if I change it into a fraction of 1/2, that's 1/2. Well, half, what note starts with half? It would be half note, right? So then that's telling you that we're going to use a half note to count. If it was 6/8, right? If I do the same thing where I take that 8 on the bottom and I make it into a fraction, I put a 1 on the top, it's going to tell me that I'm using the 8th note to count with, right? If I did, let's do 7/1, right? So if I did 7/1, right, there's a 1 on the bottom, so it'd be 7/1, or I changed the 7 to a 1, right? And that would give me 1/1. Well, 1/1 is the whole thing, so I'd be using a whole note to count the beats. This will come in handy as we move through the different time signatures. For right now, I want us to focus on 4/4, so I'm going to bring that one back. And I just wanted to give you that piece of context so that we are kind of square on what we're looking at in this frame. So again, this is the number of beats. This is 1 full measure in 4/4 time. And so that's one of the reasons why it looks the way that it does. All right. Okay. Now, let's get back. Now we already did the whole note. We already did the half note. So if I was to go with quarter notes, right? So there's enough space for me to fit 4 quarter notes in this measure. And I could fit 1 quarter note in each space because a quarter note is equal to 1 beat. Now if I wanted to go to the 8th notes, I could fit 2 8th notes in each beat. And that would look something like this. All right. Now, all of these again are equal to 4 beats. Each one of these is equal to 1 beat. And so the last one that we did was 16th notes. Let me write those in for you. And we're basically going to start building rhythms based on that. All right. So here's 4 16th notes. And another 4 16th notes. And another set of 4 16th notes. And our last set of 4 16th notes. All right. And we will get into how to divide all of these up in the next section. But anyway, this is where we're going to start. And in the next one, we'll talk about how to say, speak, and clap these rhythms. All right, thanks so much. Have a good one.